What a better time to come together and do the state of the franchise as we are, I'm going to say 5 days in, right, Jason? Because typically you got the legal tampering period. That's about 3 days and then free agent. So we're into it. And the San Francisco 49ers have been making moves along with the rest of the league. Oh boy, the league looks a lot different. But we are here to talk about the San Francisco 49ers and the current state of the franchise right now. I'm Jason Aponte. You're Brad Graham.
Finally.
Finally. So this is going to be a phenomenal show, I can already tell. So make sure you smash the like button on both channels, hit the sub button. Let's get after it. That's Jason Aponte. I'm Brad Graham. We're going to get into it all right now. I think the start of the show is perfectly on point. Jason just drove 3.5 hours. I'm sick, so we're going to make this work. But nonetheless, the 49ers have been working, Jason. But let's start off like we normally do. How are the vibes over there on the East Coast?
Living the dream, man. Anybody who's been in a car for a long time knows how hard it is to stay focused while you're driving. But I will say this, on the East Coast right now, it is 73 degrees. We're out here working. You smell that in the air, Brad? You smell that?
Smells like springtime.
Smells like being outside. Smells like getting outside.
We outside.
We might be outside. So yeah, but it's never too nice out to work. So
Absolutely. So let's talk about it. We'll do high level and then we'll drill down. I would say let's do high level, just overall thoughts on free agency so far. Some of the moves that the 49ers made. I don't think we've talked about yet the Eric Armstead departure. That became official, I believe, yesterday. Signs 3-year, believe 51 million. So I think was that 17 million per year. It's like, so let's start there. What's your take on the whole Eric Armstead situation and how that's kind of progressed and the reunion with Bulky?
I think it felt like inevitable. He's always the name that's brought up, especially with a post one designation, which clears up another $18 million with $10 million of dead money, which would be spread over the last 2 years. So it always felt like it was a little bit natural for it to be him. I think Eric Armstead is a hell of a football player. I think that for a long time he never really got his credit. I think his impact goes farther than the box score. There's a lot of sacks that have been had by other players because of Eric Armstead. I think the impact that he had was understated. I think the only thing that exceeds his play on the field when he was available was the person that he was. Walter Payton Man of the Year, and just a 49er. We'll always remember him that way. I want to say thank you, Eric, and good luck with Bulky, who believed in you the first time and swooped right back in. But yeah, it had to be done. You get that money post June 1. So June 2nd, I believe you get that extra $18 million. So the 49ers will still have a little bit more. And it probably lends itself to the idea of 49ers players being extended right before training camp. Nick Bosa, all those guys. So if you don't see any action with Brandon Ayuk, speaking of the Jaguars, I wouldn't really worry about it too much. But you're getting that extra money June 2nd. So yeah, I mean, I just want to say thank you to Eric. I think he's a hell of a player, hell of a person, and a forever 49er in my opinion. You're muted.
I think it was shocking when it all came down originally. I think it was all shock. I wasn't expecting it. I think we all could have expected that the 49ers are going to approach him about a restructure, potential pay cut, kind of like they did with Kyle Juszczyk. But I wasn't expecting it to end in his departure. So obviously that was a shock that came down almost a week ago now. It's crazy how much time is flying. But now he finds himself a Jag, and the 49ers have had to kind of scramble a little bit. And just the last piece on Eric, phenomenal leader in that locker room, man. You know, I had the opportunity to talk to multiple guys on that defensive line, and they just talk so glowingly about Eric Armstead and what he's done for them, and all of that. And obviously, we know he's a dog on the field. Biggest issue with him is just being available at times, right? But outside of that, great person in the locker room, great teammate, and a great player. So it's going to be a tough billing to replace him. But the San Francisco 49ers did that, I think, in a sense. And it was almost a straight up player for player trade. It was almost Eric Armstead for Malik Collins. That trade actually falls through because the Texans, who are cooking, by the way, they go out, get Daniil Hunter. I think they throw nearly 50 mil guaranteed at Daniil. That kills the deal because obviously the money that was tied up in Eric. So Eric doesn't go to the Texans. However, the 49ers still trade a 7th rounder to get Malik Collins into the building. Curious, what's your take on Malik? I know you've done some film breakdowns that I'll get up here in a second, but what's your take so far? First initial impression of the Malik Collins addition.
Well, one other thing with Eric Armstead that I want to point out is we should start listening to Mike Silver a little bit more. Mike Silver literally mentions his name earlier in the day, and then eventually that news comes right out after. So I think paying attention to Mike Silver a little bit more and listening to what he says should let you know that certain things are on the way. He's definitely not pulling things out of thin air.
Mike Silver is having one of the best free agency periods out of anyone
Yes.
because he called that one. Damn near called the Leonard Floyd move.
Hmm.
There's a couple of ones, and the next one he's got cooking. We'll talk about in a little bit, but yeah, Mike Silver's having a hell of an offseason.
So yeah, that closes the book on Eric Armstead's time. You know, initially with Malik Collins is you start to think about what's his role. Well, he's a pass rusher, defensive tackle. That's why you see Jordan Elliott, our good friend Jordan Elliott, joining the 49ers as well too. This is going to be my all-time favorite 49ers bit. By the way, this is going to be my all-time favorite 49ers bit. But Malik is a much better, and here's the clip right here. He's a much better pass rusher than a run defender, but this was actually a really good rep on 3rd and goal. You'll see him right there, 96. He gets right into the lane and stuffs Chuba Hubbard. Great rep right there. But he's much better. He's much better as a pass rusher. That's why him and Jordan Elliott were brought in together in tandem to make sure that they can, on situational pass downs, he'll be there. I'm not sure who'll be there on base downs, but you can see where he's good at. So I think this is the most, by far the most impressive rep of the game that I watched. He had 3 sacks in this game against Carolina. 63 is going to go against him
Right
here.
here.
He just literally sheds him with just a great move, and it's just a great pass rushing move. Look, and just throws him away. See you, sir. And he gets there and finishes and gets to the quarterback. Great rep right there. Again, situational pass rusher, a guy who's going to be way better rushing the passer than he is run defender. This game, I looked at all 3 sacks and looked at the rest of the game as well too, and saw some of the things. This is a better angle right here. You'll see 63 try to get hands on him and engage, but 96 makes a great move and just rips away from him. And Bryce
Great
Young,
move.
you have no chance right there. That's a great move from Malik Collins. This third one, his second sack, I want to say that this one is a little bit more of 93 blowing up all those guys right there in the middle. If you can see, he blows
Okay.
up all those guys in the middle right there. And then Collins gets a free run. So, yeah, it goes down as a sack. But if you watch the play closely, you'll see 93 take 2 and 3 guys with him and open up that rushing lane for Collins. Might have been a stunt. Very possible. Maybe that was the idea. But it has a lot to do with what 93 did there by occupying all 3 of guys and just opening up that lane for Collins. So yes, a sack. Wouldn't say it was something that Collins did in terms of pass rushing move, anything like that. It was just how they drew it up. And then this third one, I feel like is a lot of coverage, right? It's a great coverage sack. They kind of disguise it a little bit, show a little bit of zone, but it goes right into man. And once Bryce Young holds the ball a little too long, you're gonna see 96 get in there. And I love this coverage look. Looks a little bit like quarters. And you'll just see them dip into man. It looked like a little bit of a match, right? You see the secondary guy, the safety kind of fall a little bit further back, but he gets right down to his man in the corner. So I think this is a little bit of a coverage sack and just great effort by Collins. So I guess the thing that I'm doing when I'm looking at him, because I wasn't as familiar with his game, and don't let people tell you unless they're super hardcore, um, that they knew what Collins would bring. It's just that there's always context to all the sacks and everything as well too. So I just wanted to make sure I watched all of them and saw how it worked. But if he's going to be used situationally, he set a career high in sacks, pressures, quarterback hits. He did all those things. If he's going to be used situationally, then I see exactly what they're doing. And Jordan Elliott is one of the better run defenders. So in tandem, it should work.
And they also brought back Kevin Givens.
Yep.
So the main point of emphasis, Jason, I don't know if you're surprised by this. It hasn't been offensive line.
Oh, well, what's funny, Brad, is so
Oh,
when you looked
God.
at the offensive line options, right,
Yeah.
and you look at what they got paid, the 49ers
Yeah.
were going to be in on none of them. I mean,
Zero.
when a guard's getting
Zero.
20 million a year, what do you want the 49ers to do? So it was never going to be anything in free agency, even though we wanted on Wenyu. He got the bag. The Patriots were
Yeah.
smart. That I mean,
Yeah.
he's a very young guy. But when you see Jordan Hunt, Robert Hunt, I'm sorry, I got Jordan Elliott on my mind. You got Robert Hunt getting 20 million a year as a guard. The 49ers were never going to be in on any of that. So it's going to have to happen in the draft. But yeah, Brad, I saw the pitchforks. No more defensive line. What are you
Oh
doing?
my.
And you still have to fill out
All
this defensive line. Yeah, it's. Would you have wanted them to? First of all, if they wanted
uh,
to spend that money, I doubt they could. But yeah, I think again another thing, Brad, and we talk about this all the time. Offensive linemen are not just out there to be signed,
no,
because there's such a rare commodity that teams overpay to get them in their building and
exactly.
keep guys. So even when you
Exactly.
see Mike McGlinchey get that bag, the 49ers were already moving on. Very rarely are premium linemen out there. I know I'm not looking at the comments. I'm sure you guys are going to say Tyron Smith. If I'm Tyron Smith, I don't sign anywhere going to training camp. Call me up week 8. Let me finish out the rest of the year, and let's go ring chase, because Tyron Smith has a lot still left. But there's not really much to do in terms of that. So I think it's funny to see people, you know, foaming at the mouth about not getting offensive linemen when you look at the price points and you look at technically and for the most part, linemen aren't out there to be signed anyway. So I just think it's funny. It's always going to be O line. Like once the 49ers draft a different position at 31, I cannot wait for like the breakdowns and everything, because it's gonna be pretty fun to watch.
Dude, I keep trying to like warn people that like it's not a foregone conclusion that O line's gonna go at 31. Like,
Right.
because I don't think the value necessarily matches if the top tackles go and
Hmm.
if Graham Barton is gone and Powers is gone. If those guys are out of there, there's no point to reach on offensive linemen. In
100%.
fact, you need to punt on offensive linemen, go and target a developmental guy who's maybe doesn't have the prototypical traits that pushes these guys up. You can still find legit starters in the back end
Yeah.
of 2nd through 5. So it'll be an ongoing topic, but I thought it was funny to bring up because obviously both you and I have talked about the need for defensive line, and all we have been met with is nothing but opposition about O-line, and to
Yeah.
the point where people are saying with their full chest that defensive line wasn't a need, yet the essentially, obviously we've had some additional moves today. Today's been an active day,
Yes.
but it all started on the D line, and so let's stay there on the defensive line. So we kind of talked about the interior defensive tackles, Eric Armstead moving on, the trade, the other additional signings. But it's not just on the IDL, it's also the edge. The San
Hmm.
Francisco 49ers go out and get Leonard Floyd, a little bit older, about 30, 31, but still, you look at his sack production over the last 4 years, he's either double-digit sacks or right on the verge of double-digit sacks for the last 4 years in a row, coming from the Bills. So he still has that gear as a pass rusher coming off the edge. And then they also go out and get Yetur Gross Matos as well, who I also think is growing on me.
Hmm.
Probably the guy that's grown on me the most, just for his simple fact is I think he's our Omenahue 2.0.
Hmm.
But what is your take on the edge, how they've gone about the edge,
Hmm.
and address that need? Obviously, you saw guys like Cleveland sign with the Commanders, Kinlaw with the Jets. What do you think about the moves on the outside?
Yeah, Leonard Floyd at this point in his career is a situational pass rusher at 31, 12 sacks, according to PFF. And I actually have all the cut ups to support that. So the people who keep yelling at me about 10 and a half sacks, it's actually 12. He definitely has 12 sacks.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Do you see a stat discrepancy with PFF a lot?
Not generally, but this one was met with unreasonable pushback, to the point that people are looking around and they're like, it says 10 and a half. We literally cut up 12 sacks. That's 12 of them, right? And I think where the issue comes in with whoever is doing the stat recording is half a sack, what's not half a sack, who got there first, right? Like that type of thing. But on all 12 of the cut-ups that we have, he's either the first guy or the second guy there. Label it whatever you want. He got to the quarterback 12 times. That's all that really matters. But
Okay.
yeah, at this point at 31, situational guy. It sounds like it's going to be a committee. Gross models is super interesting now. I mean, obviously traits, right? And again, they're doing the Chris Kosurik thing, but the inside outside flexibility, I think that's another thing that we're kind of missing with the defensive tackle portion. There could be a way where both those guys are on the field at the same time while in a rotation. And I think that's something that they were kind of torn to. And I'm so glad you brought up Omenihu, because that's exactly who I think of is a guy who can rush outside, rush inside. If Chris Kosurik can get something out of him, then it looks like one of those wins where you're just like, how did anybody let him go around? Because it's obvious that he has the traits. And then, Drake Jackson is still there. And I think, again, I think if they believe that Drake Jackson was the guy that they wanted him to be, then there wouldn't be as many moves. You still need rotational guys. But I do think the way that they've been filling things, obviously he was hurt last year with them bringing in Chase Young and everyone else. They always want to have a rotation, but they still don't feel like he's that guy to be there every down, or someone that's going to be there to be reliable all the time in certain situations. So, yeah, it's going to be by committee. I would expect the 49ers to go ahead in the draft as well, too. Draft another edge. If Darius Robinson's there, wouldn't feel too bad about that at all. I think that's something that's a really good move. So,
Get
again,
ready.
it's what's funny is Mike Silver, he's cooking. So he came out with this article,
Yeah.
I believe, today, and he talked to Kyle Shanahan, and Kyle Shanahan was talking about the defense. And the defense ended up being ranked 10th in the league, which we think is a disappointment. We think the pass rush was a disappointment this season. And he talked about all those things. Now, regardless, people are coming back at this with, well, why doesn't he talk about his failures and the game management? Fine. I think two things can be true. I think you can
Yes.
be upset with the way things have been handled in certain games. And you can also say that the pass rush and the defense as a whole kind of just laid in the weeds for many weeks. And he
Yeah.
said he wanted to get that fixed. And I think it should come to nobody's surprise that the 49ers are still doing things the way that they normally do. I personally thought coming out of the combine, the 49ers would address cornerback a little bit more tough. I wanted Kenny Moore playing the slot, Demo outside. That would have been great. Kenny Moore gets a bag because he's a very good nickel corner.
Very good.
But it's business as usual right now at the facility. They want to make sure that they build back up this pass rush. And then the funny thing about that article is he talked about them getting away from the principles that made their defense good under Steve Wilkes. Now you can say, hey, that's another scapegoating move, or why do you have to kick him while he's out the door? But I think that's kind of where the disconnect between the marriage between coverage and the pass rush was coming in, was the principles
Yep.
were being changed, and there were guys that had their spin on it. D'Amico had his spin on it. So did Salah, but they still were tied to the same sort of rules. So I think it was really interesting for anybody who hasn't read it. Mike Silver's cooking. That article was very, very insightful, in my opinion.
I actually haven't read it, so I'm going to read it after this because you're absolutely right. He has been cooking. And the fact that he's been able to get some insight from Kyle, I think that's the first time we've heard anything from Kyle since the Super Bowl, since the changes at DC. And the thing you said about marrying up the rush and the coverage, that to me has been the huge issue, is that because they're not getting home on the rush, they were playing so soft that it was just so easy to complete passes. I think back to that Minnesota game where I'm flying home from being there, watching the tape, and just sitting on the plane, stewing about like how many free first downs are these guys going to give up? Like to the point where it's just like, I started calling them free first downs. I started logging them as for free first downs because it didn't feel like the coverage and the rush were tied together. It felt disjointed. And so I think that's the theme. And, you kind of spoke to that. And I think that's why Steve Wilkes, unfortunately isn't here anymore. And there's a lot of fingers to point blame to. It's not just Steve Wilkes for the situation and how the season ended. But hey, it's a new season, it's a new year, and it's time to correct those things. And the 49ers have been pouring resource after resource into this defensive line. And I don't think they're done. You alluded to Darius Robinson potentially being there at 31. I will not be shocked. I really do believe right now because, again, I don't feel the offensive lineman you want to take at 31 will be at 31. So you're looking cornerback, you're looking D end, Kool-Aid McKinstry, maybe someone else there that's available, and you go Darius Robinson. You talked about potentially attacking cornerback in free agency. Now they have signed 2 today, but they're more kind of one's a special teamer
Yep.
and one is a guy who has some starting upside but isn't like a locked in starter. So it'll be interesting to see how they ultimately handle that position. And just one last thing on Yetur, I'm really excited about his inside versatility. And I think that's something that the 49ers really missed last year, is because my hope with Cleveland was in base downs being able to rush over the guard, and they just never used him that way. Now he was great in base, right? And we saw the impact that was left when he got hurt in the playoffs. We're like, oh, why can't we contain edge? It's like we can't contain the edge because Cleveland isn't playing anymore. It's Chase and whoever they were putting out on the opposite side, Randy Gregory. And so my thing with Yetur is like, I wasn't excited about it because obviously Brian Burnside was buzzing.
I'm sorry.
And I wanted that speed, right? That's what I've
Yeah.
always wanted. And so when I looked at him, I'm like, that's not speed. We knew who he was coming out of Penn State, former second round draft pick. But then you start like spinning on it a little bit more, like, well, how are they going to use this guy? And you're like, all right, well, we haven't had that Arden Key, Charles Omenihu since Omenihu signed with the Chiefs. That's exactly where this guy feels like he's going to fit in. And when you can get that length on guards, that's a mismatch. And that's how you win. You take a guy who doesn't have that elite gear around the edge, you kick him inside, still has good hands, good motor, good pad level, all those different types of things, and you start cooking guards. That's a different story than being on an island with tackles. So I've really come around to it. Like at first I was like, oh, like that's the wrong Panther. But at the same time, it's like, I think I see the vision.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you have to absolutely exercise caution, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from with the move. Is you do have to kind of exercise some caution. There's some reason to be optimistic, but it's not something that you can set your watch to. And
Yeah.
it feels like something that takes a bit of a leap of faith. And I think this fan base wasn't ready for something like that, especially early on in free agency when there were other guys out there and things like that. But yeah, I do think I completely understand the hesitance to automatically praise the move. But if we're talking purely what you're seeing and what this move is supposed to represent, it's everything that Brad outlined in terms of versatility and trying to tap into those traits. Generally, the 49ers usually get those guys later on in free agency out of nowhere or in a trade, right? Like with Omenihu, with Arden Key, like they kind of just fall like at the end, like towards the
Yeah.
end. And this one was a little bit early on. That's why I think there's some people that are frustrated with it because it does require a bit of a leap of faith and you are kind of projecting as opposed to pointing to something that you set your watch to and have seen over and over again with gross models.
Yeah. So I think I like it. First returns, I think, on the 49ers kind of retooled defensive line. I don't think it's like, oh, this crazy elite, defensive
Right.
line. I think when
Right.
you have the money invested into Bosa, the money invested into Hargrave, and you got those 2 guys now anchoring inside out, and you kind of build a defensive line around them. All right, I see what we're doing here. Obviously, like you alluded to, I think there's still draft needs that need to go into this, but I think one of the keys of this free agency period, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, is that's what it feels like they're doing. It feels like yet again filling every positional need with a player so that when they go into the draft, they can really focus on the guys that they want. Does that how you're reading all these moves that they've made so far?
For sure, especially when you look at what happened today with Feliciano and McKivitz. I don't think that they're intent on running it back. I think they're insulating themselves to watch the draft play out, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't want to be the guy or the team that's sitting there hoping that a lineman falls to you or trying to get one, and then you swing and miss, and you let Feliciano go, and you've let McKivitz walk, or like you don't have him there, even though I believe his contract was extended. He was already going to be here,
Yeah.
and then you've got to like rely on Burford. I think ultimate flexibility is what they're trying to get to. So bottom line, worst case scenario, yes, there is a possibility the 49ers will run it back with this offensive line. I know that's not going to make anyone happy.
Hmm.
But I do think when Feliciano was in there at right guard, there was an improvement in play. But that does afford
Yeah.
them the time to go get someone in the draft and not force them into a role right away to avoid those growing pains, and you still have a baseline. I think that's the best way to look at it. Is the 49ers are giving themselves a safety net of the baseline of what they've had last season. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to eschew the position at all in the draft. And it doesn't mean that they need to get a guy right away that can step in and play, because aside from Mike McGlinchey, aside from Burford, they really don't play right away under Kyle Shanahan. This could put the 49ers in a position. Patrick Paul is somebody that you could think about, right? Like that you can wait
Mm.
for a little bit longer, and you can
Yep.
still insulate yourself with a baseline of play. And it doesn't mean that they're done there. I hope that's rational, but I
Very
understand why
rational.
there's the hesitance to praise the move of bringing in McKivitz and Feliciano, because it does feel like the 49ers, you could look at this and say, hey, they're just running it back and they don't want to address anything. I don't necessarily think that that's true. I just think they're giving themselves a baseline of at least what they can set their watch to, because the 49ers do know that they still have to compete again next year while keeping themselves flexible in the draft.
Yeah, I think the re-signing of Feliciano is a great move because it's not going to cost you a lot, and
Right.
you already know what you're getting. Like
Right.
you are getting a starting offensive lineman. And he proved to be able to be a starting offensive lineman with the 49ers, even though it took until the playoffs, until earning that spot. Because let's be honest, the 49ers wanted to give Spencer Burford every opportunity to continue to improve and get better. And that's also not to say that you need to throw Spencer Burford in the garbage. Like
No.
Burford is still a very prototypical esque guard when it comes to physical traits. The thing that Burford needs to continue to work on are the technical aspects, are understanding what is required of you at any given situation. And that's one of the hardest parts about playing offensive line is you have multiple fronts in front of you. They're stunting, they're showing blitz, they're backing out, they're bringing loopers. You have to be so locked in to what is happening because you have to make split decisions. You got to block a guy with one arm while you're staring down the potential looper. Like you have to be a king of multitasking. And I think that's kind of where we saw Burford struggle is that this scheme is so predicated on perfect technique. If you just mess it just a little bit, you can screw up the whole play.
And I wanted to ask you this, Brad, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's just
No, go
because you
for it.
brought up something that's kind of been going through my mind. How much of the offensive line struggles, particularly in the Super Bowl, were less getting blown off the ball or blowing assignments?
To me, it was blowing assignments.
I thought it was too. It wasn't a time where I was watching that game over and I saw the offensive linemen getting beat every single time. It felt like it was guys missing their assignments. Now, that's not to say, again, that anyone who is screaming for offensive line, especially on the right side, is wrong. I don't think that that's true. But when I was watching that game over, I'm like, man, that's a missed assignment. That's not one on one getting beat. Alexa, turn off. It's not one on one getting beat.
Alexa, shut up.
It's not one on one just not getting blocked. It felt like missed assignment after missed assignment. And when you miss assignments against Chris Jones and you send him up the gut, you're gonna have a rough time. So I'm not trying to talk down to people. You know how a lot of people are like, well, if you don't know offensive line assignments, you don't know ball. I'm not talking about that. I think
Mhm.
fans can still clamor for an upgrade, and rightfully so. I think that's
Of
fine
course.
because I have myself complained with the amount of resources the 49ers have kind of put in to the offensive line, where it's less about draft picks and more about, again, baseline production. But
Mm.
I had a tough time putting a lot of those sacks and pressures on just straight up getting whipped, as opposed to missed assignments and miscommunication more than anything, Brad.
100%. You're absolutely right. And that's been my biggest gripe with Burford for the last 2 years. It's assignment based issues. And that's why I prefaced it as saying he has the prototypical tools and traits that you want. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the power, he's got all the things you want. But when the thing that I learned as a player playing on the offensive line is like you could have all the physical tools you want, but if you aren't doing your job, you hurt your team. You hurt everyone around you. And that's why for me, yes, you of course want to get a Panay Sewell on the right side. You want a Lane Johnson on the who doesn't? But there's also context that if your right guard is blowing assignments, you make your center and you make your right tackle look a lot worse than maybe they really are. And so when you saw Jonathan Feliciano get knocked out of that game and Spencer Burford had to come in, guess when the offensive line issues started to pop up? And that was kind of the situation throughout the year is that, listen, Burford is got so much potential and he's still very young. And so I'm nowhere near throwing this guy out. I'm spending time. We need to get there. But when you aren't there mentally, you mess up your whole group. And that's why offensive line is very difficult to evaluate because each guy needs to work in tandem or in trios. Like you have to work together. And if one guy is off, the whole group is off. The whole offense is off. And when you have guys like Chris Jones coming at your neck or Aaron Donald who just retired today or whatever, it can make the whole unit look like they aren't pulling their weight when in reality it's just one guy's struggling. So this is the way that I'm looking at it. It's like Feliciano coming back. We know he can be that's exactly what he brought to the table. It was apparent when he went in at left guard, right guard, and bounced around. He brought continuity. He brought consistency. And that was one of the things that I learned as a player is that it's more important to be consistent as an offensive lineman than a guy who's making pancake after pancake, than a guy who's blowing a dude 5 yards off the ball. You got to be consistent. And so that's just where he's struggling right now. And so bringing Feliciano back, I think is a good thing. And like we're talking about, it now gives them flexibility to be able to make moves, to potentially go get a center in the second or third, not have to overdraft, go get a cornerback, wide receiver, edge who's going to be able to play right away. And so I think it's a good move. We'll see. And again, I think it's important to contextualize it was Colton McKivitt's first year as a starter, and he's a natural guard, in my opinion, and he's playing tackle. So give him some time, just a little bit. Well, and I get it. You want the elite guys, but let's see what this group looks like, with one more year.
I'm still not going to push back against any 49er fan that would like an upgrade at right tackle. No
Of
disrespect to Colton
course,
McKivitz either. Like,
of
no
course,
disrespect at all. I guess I'm just trying to attack this viewpoint from, okay, what are they cooking? What are they cooking? Are they really going to run this back just like this? I don't think that is fully their intention, but the 49ers like to insulate themselves and always give themselves a safety net. And in this regard,
yeah.
it's, well, we could at least run it back with this if things don't run out the same way in the draft, and you don't get the guy you
I
targeted.
mean, they made it to the Super Bowl with that
Yeah,
group, so
100%, right? Yeah, but the best laid plans of mice and men, right? So you can have a whole plan set about how you think the draft's gonna go. Someone steals your guy, and you didn't bring back McKivitz because you thought you were gonna fill in that hole right there, right tackle. Well, now you got a bigger issue, because now you got to scramble and find somebody. So I think, again, I understand the want to upgrade at the offensive line. I think that's the one thing
of
that
course,
everybody is absolutely dead set on, and I think they're
of
absolutely
course.
right.
And I think the
But
49ers are too. I think they
yeah,
do want to
100%.
upgrade there.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like, I don't think they're just getting rid of the position or stop looking at it. I think this is again baseline, and this is something that is a bit of a safety net because the draft is tricky sometimes, and there are things that happen where guys get taken and you have them. Would that necessitate a trade up? Who knows? I would love to see the 49ers, especially with all those comp picks in the back end, load up and try to go get somebody, and go get their guy. But you don't know how the draft's going to play out. It does take two to tango. So I think the 49ers are just insulating themselves and saying, at worst, we can run it back with this offensive line.
Right.
And I'm not looking at the comments, but I'm sure you guys are upset. I'm just trying to give you like a little bit of, just a level-headed look at it. And please don't yell at me. I'm just trying to figure out what they're doing in their head.
Yeah, and I'm also admittedly biased for the offensive line. So,
Yeah.
I'm always going to give my guys the benefit of the doubt for the most part, but I'm going to try to keep it as real as possible. My ideal dream scenario, Jason, is the 49ers trade up. It's not going to happen, but they trade up to probably 15 or higher and go take Troy Faltanu out of Washington because he can play all 5 spots. You can put him at center, you can put him at guard, you can put him at tackle, left, right. That guy is an athlete. If you want to upgrade your offensive line and you want to hit on any one of those 5 spots across the offensive line, go get Troy. Those guys don't exist. Those
Right.
guys don't come into the draft often. He is, to me, going to be one of the best offensive linemen in this class.
Right. And then what if the 49ers go out and they draft Mims? And Mims off the bat sounds like a bit of a project, right? 7 games, only 7 games at Georgia. He's a
Yeah,
freak, right? So
huge.
he's huge. He's a freak, right? But you get Mims, and then you go to training camp with the idea of this may take a little bit longer, but if he goes to training camp and he starts, going crazy, then you can start him. So again,
Absolutely.
there's a
Absolutely.
there's a lot of ways to go at this, and I don't think anything's final. I just think again this is a safety net. So again, if you're looking at a guy like Mims who doesn't have the college production, but has this, he looks like a minotaur, like literally is like out of Greek mythology. He looks like a Greek mythology, right? And he's absolute freak. And you may have it in your head that he may not be ready day one, but he will be our guy. But if he shows up to camp and he starts killing people, then you can go right to him and you still have a backup plan behind him and you still have quality depth. That's why the Colton McKivitz signing, while you look at the money, you could say, oh, that's starter money. I don't know if that's true. I don't
That's
know if that's true. I don't know if that automatically signs that. It just means that you have him under contract to make sure that whatever you do in the draft, you're insulated with something else. So again, there's many ways that they can attack this. I don't think anything's final, but I do think that looking at this and saying they're running it back, I don't think that that's proper either because that is one of the options, but it doesn't seem like the 49ers are just intent with that option. And I don't think that's where the disconnect is for me when I was looking through Twitter today.
Of course. And part of that too, it's like, I don't know I think we both agree on this. I think we've talked about this before, but the transition from O-line from college to the
Mhm.
NFL is the steepest out of, I think, any position.
Mhm.
You are able to hit and get those random guys like Onwenu, who was a 6th-round draft pick, who somehow just becomes a starter and they do really well and come out of nowhere. But yeah, we saw Aaron Banks struggle right out the gate as a 2nd-round pick who played at Notre Dame, a big time Power 5, school. Well, they're not technically in a conference, but they play big time D1 football, big time athletes. It's not a foregone conclusion that a rookie's just going to come in and start balling. So
Mhm.
insulated. They have at minimum the starting offensive line that took them to a Super Bowl last year. Uh, Best case scenario, they do find an upgrade at one or multiple of those positions, and the offensive line improves. Worst case scenario, you get a developmental guy, and when Feliciano, McKivitz, Brendel, and their times are up, you have someone there to be ready to go to take over, like we've seen when they took Aaron Banks while Laken Tomlinson had 1 year left on his deal. So I think that's the best case scenario. Not the best case scenario. I think the realistic option for offensive line is they are going to draft guys to sit behind and develop, barring one of these dudes coming into training camp and just being like, oh, pulling a Spencer Burford and beating out, Brunskill in training camp or in OTAs, and then they split reps, the
Right.
whole season. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the offensive line.
And I can absolutely see McKivitz sliding into Brunskill's role at that money as well too, being bouncing around like just in case something
Good point.
happens. Again, guard, tackle. For a game or two, he's played left tackle, he's played right tackle, he's played guard. He can do all those things. It could be that type of role. So, when the rush to judgments because you see money come out and you think why are they resigning him, doesn't necessarily mean that they're intent on running it all the way back. I think again they're keeping themselves flexible, and I think that's what the 49ers have ultimately tried to do. But again, like Brad said, like I said, they can draft one of these developmental guys, but if he shows up and he's a dude right away, then great. you got
Run
you
it. Yeah.
you run it, then you got depth behind them. So I don't think they're done with the offensive line. That's just my thought on the first reading of the situation.
Speaking of not being done, I think we covered most of the free agent moves so far. Again, they signed 2 cornerbacks today. It appears Conley's coming back. That's some
Yep.
special teams depth. I guess we could talk about the whole like linebacker thing with Eric
Mhm.
Kendricks flipping and then pivoting to Devondre Campbell. What's kind of your overall take on Devondre, who at one point was an All-Pro, maybe took a step back, but what are your overall thoughts on that signing?
Well, with Eric Kendricks, I can't fault him for leaving because who wouldn't want to go on vacation a little bit earlier as opposed to keep playing for the rest of the season? Hi-yo, bow. But with Devondre Campbell, I think he's not the player that we thought, right? The All Pro. I don't think he's that type of guy.
I
But again,
agree.
right now, what you're looking for is you're looking for someone who can just fill in snaps for whenever Dre Greenlaw is going to be ready. And we don't know what that timeline is. You still do need guys who have NFL experience. He doesn't have to be amazing. He doesn't have to be Dre Greenlaw. He has to be someone who's steady. And I think that regardless of how you view him from his all pro season, which I think we can all agree he is not anymore, he's still, again, baseline and someone that can help. And the only thing that I would say is when you're looking around, I'm not sure that they didn't bring back Oren Burks, right? Just yet?
No, no.
No.
They brought back Demetrius Flanagan Fowles.
Oh, so DFF and him, they'll be there, but you do need baseline, you do need bodies. I think D Winters and Jalen Graham, I don't think we know anything about what they are, but I do think we know from what we saw in the limited time that they were playing is that they still need time. So again, when you're looking at this team and you're looking at what you can count on, what you're looking forward to, Devondre Campbell isn't something where it's just like, oh my gosh, Super Bowl, like how did they let this happen? It's really about just
Yeah.
depth at this point and just filling it in with players who are veterans and possibly could be unlocked. I think he's alluded to the fact that he felt that he was misused by Joe Barry in Green Bay. How realistic is that? I'm not certain. I'm not going to say until I look into the tape and take a look. But I think we can all agree he's not that player that was an All Pro 2 years ago. More depth and probably someone that can give more baseline at this point. It's not a sexy move. A lot of these moves aren't sexy, but you still have to fill out a roster of 53 men.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think the 49ers are doing.
Absolutely. Niner Drag with a super chat says, should the faithful have more faith in 2024 O line with more experience gained? And is that what management is saying to us right now? What do you say?
I think that's one way to look at it. And I don't think they're saying that to you. I think again it goes back to my point of, we have a plan in the draft, but the best laid plans of mice and men can be broken at any moment in the draft, especially when we're talking about prospects and guys are doing draft day things where it's this player no matter what, and they'll take them a little bit higher than you thought they would go, and now your plan is shot. I think at the end of the day, they feel like at worst we can run back this entire offensive line and possibly, try to get back. I know that's not the sexiest thing and that's not what people want to hear, but there is a way to look at this and say, hey, McKivitz has another year under his belt. He might be a little bit better. Banks isn't going to be as injured, right? Feliciano, when he's there and he was the right guard, you saw the right side take a little bit of a step. So I think all those things are true, but I don't think that they're like stamping their flag and just saying, this is your five. We don't care. We're not even going to look at anybody else in the draft. I don't think that that's what's going on.
Yeah, I think you can look at it in one sense that McKivitz is going to get another year to be able to potentially run it back at right tackle. You then build some continuity with Jonathan Feliciano, who again didn't start all year. He was literally thrust. He was hopping back and forth between left and right. And so maybe what does that look like heading into training camp with familiarity, with the right spot locked down? And those guys can really build a rapport between center and tackle with their guard, and not have to worry about. I mean, if you think about it, like I've talked about the platooning at right guard and it being one of the wildest things I've ever seen at the NFL level, right? Because it's like it doesn't only impact the two guys who are platooning, it impacts the tackle and it impacts the guard because they have to know how each person plays at any given time when they're in.
Right.
Because you have to know their weaknesses and their strengths. So you know where you need to pick up the slack, or you know where they can help pick up the slack. That's another thing that's never been or doesn't get discussed a lot about the whole platooning thing. It's like you're not building continuity. I'm a big continuity guy with the O line, and so that could be a benefit. That's one way to look at it. You could get more stability with Feliciano starting at guard. You can get more stability with a second year of McKivitz. You know, Brendel's year was an anomaly to me because he started out really strong. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yes, he's getting better. He got better than last year. And then he dipped.
He did.
And again, so that's something that we will have to pay attention to. So, and you know, Banks, I thought had a very spotty year.
He did
as well. So, and the whole offensive, let's just call it as what it is. The whole offensive line had a spotty year. So maybe there's room for more experience and more continuity, but we'll find out in training camp. That's where the battles are going to be had. It's going to be a very hard fought battle for a rookie to supplant, but we've seen it happen before and it will happen again. So it'll be very, very interesting, especially if the 49ers go early with offensive line, because that would tell you, like we've seen it, Jason. I remember when you and I showed up to training camp and after they traded for Trey Sermon, and you remember that first day of team period and the first running back out was Trey Sermon, and we're like, wait, over Mostert?
Mm-hmm.
First snap goes to Trey Sermon, the rookie you just took over Mostert. So that's not typically how the Niners work, but we've seen it before and we saw it with Burford. So it could happen again. But to your point, it's insulation is what it is. And it's security and flexibility.
100%.
Absolutely. Shiza says, what are the chances Niner pick up O-line from the draft to develop them before the few vets leave?
I think that's what we're kind of alluding to. I think they're very high. I think again, that's the thing is you take one of these guys, hope that they develop. You still have your baseline, but if he comes in and it turns into a dude, then fine. Then you've got depth behind him, you know, with experience. And again, I don't think that's so bad. I wouldn't read too far into this saying they're just absolutely running it back, because then that would be the worst thing, because the 49ers, aside from the fact that you're kind of putting the fan base in a tough spot because they've been yelling for offensive line, but that would be the worst thing, because now you're not doing best player available going into the draft. And that kind of scares me a little bit more than anything. And I don't think the 49ers are in that spot. So that flexibility is where they're at. But I think it's a very high chance the 49ers pick a lineman who is either a straight up developmental project or just needs a little bit of work. But again, that's why you go to camp, and if they start balling, then they're gonna play. I guarantee you. If someone's balling, Kyle's not gonna say, "Hey man, he's just a rookie. I'm not playing him." Like, if he's balling, he's gonna play. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
And my answer to this: what are the chances? 100%, 150%. They are going to draft an offensive lineman, and that is coming from a person who understands that I can count the amount of offensive linemen on two hands that the 49ers have drafted. Like, they do not spend a ton of draft capital on offensive line. Now they have, you know, invested draft capital in the offensive line, but they don't go volume. Right.
And it's not super high end, because I think even with Aaron Banks, we felt like that was a little high in the second round.
Oh yeah, a little bit. And especially in that draft with Quinn Miners, who went in the third, you know, very similar power style guard. You could have punted a little bit there. Um, but, it doesn't mean Aaron Banks isn't going to be and isn't a good player for the 49ers. But I think when you look at what they've done, invested a first round, top 10 pick in McGlinchey, they get the second round pick in Banks, a fourth round pick in Burford, a fifth round pick in McKivitz, a sixth round pick in School, a fifth round pick in Jalen Moore. So they have, like, I catch myself sometimes saying this, like, oh, the 49ers don't invest in offensive line. And it's like, well, they did pay Weston Richburg a
They
ton of
did.
money.
They did.
He just got hurt.
Yeah.
And then they were able to compound that loss by getting Alex Mack.
Alex Mack, yeah.
Then he retired.
Yeah.
So it's like they do. It's just not a volume play. And that's
it's not high end. That's it. It's just
not
not
high
high
end.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. It's not high end, especially at the guards outside of, Banks. But also, I mean, Lincoln, they traded for him. And he turned out to be pretty well. They traded for Trent Williams. So it's like I catch myself, using like, oh, they don't invest in offensive line. It's like, well, they have. It's how it feels weird. Like it feels like they haven't, but they clearly have. They haven't hit on some of the guys. Nick Zakel, 6th round draft pick. They just haven't come. I think I said Justin School, but they just haven't come to fruition like we had hoped for. So I would imagine the 49ers are going offensive line again, but you have to also keep in mind last year was an anomaly. They had 9 offensive linemen, right? Because they had 2 swing tackles, Pryor and Moore. They had Feliciano, they had Ben Barch, and Zakel. That is not normal to have that many offensive linemen rostered. So it'll be interesting to see. Ben Barch, any last take on the O-line? I know 49er fans are foaming at the mouth to talk offensive line. Any last comment on that?
Yeah, I would just say exercise some patience. I don't think that it necessarily means that they're running it back. I've seen that take a ton. I don't know if I necessarily think that that's the final plan, but it is one of the possibilities. So, if you're going to tweet it and then say, well, I told you they were running it back, I don't think that it would be because you were absolutely like dead on getting it right, and more about they didn't have the plan, or their plan didn't come to fruition in the draft. So again, I think the investment into the O-line thing, like we're talking about, is just a frustration of not blue chip guys, not first round, not second round. And then the 49ers haven't had high end picks for a long time, right? Because of the Trey Lance trade. So yeah, I do think that, that's one of the possibilities of them running it back, but I don't think that that's like plan A. And I think they're just insulating themselves.
Absolutely. So I see it kind of popping up in the chat, and so the chat is on point with what I was thinking. For one of our final questions here is there's got to be one more move to be made, and at minimum, and it feels like we keep hearing, oh, there's a big move coming, or there's hey, Justin Simmons, Mike Silver is hot on the Justin Simmons propaganda. Buy or sell Justin Simmons as a San Francisco 49ers this year?
I'd love that. And I think what 49er fans have to remember, because the whole like Hufanga's losing his spot. Well, what if, and stay with me here, Justin Simmons, Jair Brown, Hufanga gets a little bit closer to the line and starts to play a little bit more of a hybrid linebacker cover guy? What
You're
would be the
smart. You're smart, Jason.
what
It's
would
like
be
you
the
know
harm?
ball.
What would be the harm in that? So again, I'd love Justin Simmons to be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Hufanga would be off the field. I think there's a way to have all 3 of those guys on the field, and I think you can mix and match, especially with how closely Hufanga and Tig resemble each other's skill set. But we talked about it after the Super Bowl when Dre Greenlaw left. They started picking on linebackers. Well, now you have a guy a little bit closer to the line, Hufanga, who can either blitz, very good in run support, possibly help you out in coverage in certain spots. What if the 49ers are cooking a safety look? And I don't think that that's something that should be tossed aside as no chance.
I mean,
You muted again, yeah.
Oh, all right. Hold on.
You threw your headphones.
Yeah, I know. Great point. because if history were to repeat itself, last time we saw a starting safety go down with an injury, they brought in a free agent, and that free agent didn't let go of the starting spot for 2 years. And he replaced a captain, one of the longest tenured players on the team, and they kicked him to a different spot and literally said, "You're playing this spot or you're benched." So, and if you don't know, I'm talking about Jimmy Ward. So I think the 49ers, what it sounds like, and what Mike Silver's been alluding to is that they are trying to upgrade at safety. That's kind of what it sounds like. They I think we saw some of that in the playoffs, where Jair Brown didn't get the start against the Packers, right? And then he started in the Super Bowl
Right.
because they realized, all right, maybe Logan Ryan, just even though we perceive to trust him better to make the smarter play, he's not the better player. And that showed up a little bit. Um, I think one of the things with Kyle that we've recognized is he's very hesitant with rookies. Now he has
Yeah.
played in the past. I mean, you look at Elijah Mitchell, he broke the 49ers rookie rushing mark set by Frank Gore, like he played a lot, but that was more due to necessity than anything else because Raheem Mostert got hurt first game of the year. Ambry Thomas played extended snaps as a rookie because they lost both their cornerbacks, or they lost Jason Verrett. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that safety spot. But I mean, if you can get Justin Simmons, like I didn't even talk about him really as an option because I didn't think they'd swing on a four-time All-Pro safety who I would still consider a top 10 safety in this league.
100%.
To come in. I didn't expect it. I was thinking like if you want to swing for some upside, go get Cameron Curl, who signs with the Rams. Still 24 years old, right? Has a lot of upside and starting experience under his belt with Washington. But he goes to the Rams. So Simmons is very intriguing, and it does feel like they are in that safety market. My question to you is, if Simmons goes elsewhere, what's the move then?
Well, I think that would start to come down to who's left at depth at the end of the day, and that's another thing with the free agency period. When you're going through the first few days, obviously you see all these big names, but there's like a month period after where you're like, man, this guy's still not signed. This guy's still not signed. This like, there's always
Yeah,
gonna
that's
be
true. That's
a
true.
pool of players. So it would be either them going ahead and looking at one of these players that's still around that could possibly help. I think the the goal is to put Diamador Lenore back outside and find another slot corner, which is kind of what my thinking was with Kenny Moore and hoping that he would come over. Or you find someone in the draft. So I think again, it's really up to the 49ers and their plan, but staying flexible is really important. But I wouldn't poo-poo the idea of Justin Smith being there and having him take and Hufanga on the field all at the same time, especially considering Sorensen's wants to go back to the Seattle principles that we've kind of been running with our defense and that we're kind of tied to. Could make them a little bit more flexible and could be somebody that you can mess around with, towards the line of scrimmage in run defense, in pass coverage, and someone who's ultimately flexible. I think that's fine.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. I think there's I mean clearly today has been one of the most active days for the 49ers and it kind of fits into, you know, filling out the depth, cost controlled, efficient signings, not any crazy splashes, but like to your point, there's still some dudes out there. And we'll even see guys hang out until OTAs or the beginning of training camp. I mean, how many edge rushers did we see? Like
Right.
the Yannick Ngakwe's and the Jadavion Clowney's just
Justin Houston.
chilling, yeah, until training camp or like halfway through training camp. So there will be another pool to pick from if that's where they get into OTAs and like, all right, we need this, we need that. Let's go look around. But again, to kind of recap our kind of free agency episode of State of the Franchise, it's filling needs,
Yeah.
filling spots that have been left open by either starters who have left or just try just I mean that's really what it comes down to. Just trying to replace guys that have left.
Yeah, you got 53 guys that have to make this roster as well too. And again, you have to remember all the draft picks that you have, they may not make the team, some do, some don't, but you have to start building this roster as if you have a game this month or coming up, right? Because the draft is next month, but you have to start putting yourself in a position where you're laying the groundwork for everything while looking towards the future in the draft. So, yeah, I think because it's not the sexiest of names, because it's not names that we all wanted, I think that's what's kind of led to a little bit of the pushback. But
Yeah,
they do have to find a way to put 53 there. So yeah, there's a lot of depth to be had.
absolutely. If we had to if I had to put you on the spot
Hmm.
and give me a grade, just a simple grade of how you would grade this free agency period so far, all the moves, including the Eric Armstead release, the restructures, all of it. What would you give it so far?
C plus. And I think again that's subject to change right now. Just because it's really about kind of it takes a village to raise a child that they say. So now you're trying to fill Eric Armstead's slot with a bunch of people. You're trying to fill the edge position, with
With a
a bunch of
bunch of
people.
different people. Yeah,
Right, with a bunch of different people. So I mean, while that is one way to attack that, and you don't go one for one, it still leaves them flexible. So right now, I give it a C plus, but it has a chance to improve with what they do in the draft and what the return in the draft would be. It's not just drafting good prospects right now, too. It's actually getting them to contribute. So I
right.
think that's another thing is because the position the 49ers are in right now with having to hit on this draft is because of the guys that they've taken in the last two. Well, he'll need a year. Well, he'll need a year. He'll need some time. Here we are. Some of these guys have to come in and be instant contributors, and it can't just be the kicker. So I think that's kind of where we are when it comes to this draft and why it feels so important for this regime because you've kind of kicked the can down the road and you've masked it by winning. So you want to make
Right.
sure that you have guys that could possibly step in, shouldn't have to be forced to, but the idea is trying to get day one contributors if possible.
I think you nailed it. I think, C plus, is absolutely valid. I think that one of the biggest hits on the grade is losing Eric Armstead, right?
Yeah.
Because now you have to backfill that position. And we've seen it done with more cost controlled guys, our guy Jordan Elliott, getting having to trade a draft pick for a guy that you hopefully could have gotten a one-on-one trade, so I think we've seen this from the 49ers before. There's plan A, plan B, plan C, and they're kind of like in plan S right now, with some of the moves, I would say. Like I feel like the Eric Armstead, I'm not sure they're like, yeah, we plan on releasing Eric Armstead this offseason. I think they were more hoping that it would have just been a restructure or a pay cut or whatever. But you also can't fault Eric either. I mean, dude got paid, no state income tax. Credit to him. I went and looked at how he posted that video
Yeah.
of breaking down his thing. They take out 50%. His game check is 400K. He's walking out of there with 200. I'm like,
Yeah.
and in my head, I'm like, well, dude, 200K is life changing money for guys like you and I. And then but I'm like, that's his take home. It should have been 400K, and that's
Right.
every game. And then compound that. I was like, damn. Like, well, when you get that big money figure, those taxes really hit. So,
And he got
hey,
the same amount of money at the same annual average over there, but it's gonna go a lot farther in Florida, man.
and he's with his boy Balky. So hey, we'll see how it
Damn
goes.
you,
But
Bulky.
I'm gonna have to go have a word with them again at the combine.
Oh, all right. Speaking of Bulky,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right, Graham,
yeah.
fourth round pick for Keenan Allen,
He went to the Jags. Is that where he went to the Jags?
Bears.
Bears. Great move by the Bears because
Oh, what?
they had the cap space, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
they take on his contract.
Oh yeah.
You get Keenan Kiki. Do you love me? Come on, dog. I got his jersey hanging up right over here.
Keenan Allen and
That's
DJ Moore.
dude. Caleb
Ooh,
Williams. I mean, that's what it seems like.
that's a
And
lot of fun.
they got DeAndre Swift.
DeAndre Swift, actually, yep, that's a lot of fun. And they
Cole
still
Kmet
have
is as a dog to me. I
mhm.
got Cole Kmet dynastied up all over
Darnell
the
Darnell
place.
Mooney signed a pretty big contract with the
The
Atlanta Falcons too
Falcons.
and left.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, woo, Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, that is deadly, man. That's gonna be a lot of fun.
You got the game breaking ability of DJ Moore, and then you got the possession god in Keenan Allen, the route savant out there. So yeah, that's my guy, Kiki.
Crazy too. It's
Fourth
crazy what he did
rounder,
last
dog.
year too. Last year too, like at the end of the year, he was injured, but like he had like I think it was like 5 straight games with like 14 catches, man. My God, like he was just going crazy still. Like the man just knows how to get himself open.
Bro, we could do another hour on just the moves that are happening across the league, but I'll spare us
Yeah,
with some of that
100%.
because there's the league looks like it's a 180. Like it looks different. There's been like 14 quarterback moves. It's been insane.
You know what's
Absolutely
funny?
insane.
What's funny is Justin Herbert's gonna have to start throwing the football to himself, man. I don't know, but
Could you imagine Justin Herbert with a running back or with a running game? Except
oh,
who's their running back?
Gus Edwards.
Gus Bus is their
Yes.
running back.
Yes.
Oh
Yeah,
boy.
familiar with Roman scheme, but
Right.
the wide receiver core as of today, Quentin Johnson, and they let go of Mike Williams,
Palmer,
and Palmer, right? And they
Darius,
could
the
find
rookie out of TCU.
they could find themselves with Neighbors or Udons as well
Yeah, that's
too,
probably what it's gonna
right,
be.
which is kind of what the thought process is.
Dude, it was so funny. Obviously, I haven't seen you since the combine when we were vibing, but I was at the stadium, sitting there, watching the drills, and Greg Roman just walks like the row in front of me, just walks by. I'm like, it's like, oh, that's Greg Roman. it's like
You should have grabbed him by the shirt and been like,
again.
why did you let Jeep Chris call those 4 fades in
The
the fourth
thoughts
goal?
that went through my brain when I'm watching this guy, I'm like, you cost me a Super Bowl.
No,
I'm
but
like,
it wasn't though. Remember? All right,
I
real
know
quick.
it's Jeep Chris. He's the pass game coordinator.
I never understood this thought process, and I know that we all blame Greg Roman, but to have one guy calling
I
plays in
blame
one part,
Greg Roman for everything.
yeah, everybody, like, listen, I get it. Greg Roman is like the what is it, like the never-ending cycle?
He's like a scapegoat for that
Good
whole
season, really good offense, doesn't look so good, falls off, fires. Good season, really good offense, kind of like everything over and over.
Starts off hot, gets
Right.
vanilla, teams
Right.
figure him out, then he
Right.
turns into a pumpkin, and then he's out of there.
And I don't want to bring this back up and like rip the scab off or anything like that. But when Colin Kaepernick had 4 shots at the goal line, everyone's like, "Why did Harbaugh and Roman call?" No, Jeep Chris was the red zone guy, and they had 3 different guys calling plays this entire time. It's just what type of offense is that, and why did we allow this to happen?
My favorite thing is like as of like a month or two ago, Harbaugh being like, "Yeah, I think we should have ran it more down there."
Oh my god, that makes me so mad. I mean, you know what, dude? Don't say anything. Don't say anything. Don't say a word. Don't ever mention it again. Don't ever mention it again, and don't say anything like that. God,
dude, that's how you know the PTSD is strong, man. I'm sitting there and like, listen, I had a lot of beef with Greg Roman because I just don't think they developed Kaepernick either. I feel like they tried to go into a more spread style offense, and then after they got their freaking lunch taken week 2 against Seattle, I think it was like 2013, they completely reverted back to 3 tight ends, Bruce Miller special. And I was like, what are we doing here, man? Like, this is the dude who threw for 10,000 yards and rushed for 4,000 at Nevada, and you're having him under center, like handing the ball off to Frank Gore 40 times a game. Like, yeah, as you can see, I feel very strongly. And so when he walked by, those feelings just immediately percolated. I'm like, keep it together, keep it together. Obviously, I'm not going to be a fool or anything like that, but it's just funny the intrusive thoughts that come up when you're a fan of a team, for so long, and you're face to face with the guys who, again, it very well could have been Jeep Christ who's to blame for those 4 fades, but I just think of all that stuff and I'm like, here you are standing right in front of me. If we struck up a conversation, I wonder what would come out of like what I would say to you, because I wouldn't be rude or anything like that, but it's just like, again, intrusive thoughts. Like I've been scarred by that game for more than a decade. And I'm like, are you responsible for this pain that I carry with me?
All right, that's the show. I'm gonna go drink myself under the table on Friday night. I didn't think I was gonna be this sad. Make sure you guys like.
That's a perfect note to get out of here. But yeah,
Oh.
man, so good, so good. And we'll see. But what's exciting is I'm ready to talk draft prospects. So hopefully within about the next couple days, free agency calms down and we're off of it. And I think that's where we're at. So you got anything cooking next week? I know it's Friday. Anything you got next week?
I've actually been doing a lot of draft prospect watching, so I want to do a video that may not be a live, just me going through some of the things that I've seen and evaluating some of the guys. So look out for that, and obviously, Sprint Right Option podcast, Bully Ball podcast on Gold Standard Podcast Network, and every day writing on Niners Nation, same old thing, man, and just trying to keep it going before we get to the draft next month. So yeah,
absolutely. So we're almost there, Jason. Almost there. Shout out to everyone who jumped in to the show, whether you guys are watching on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Make sure you go to either both our Twitters, both our YouTubes, wherever, sub to both, like to both, follow to both. We would really appreciate you all doing that. It's been great. Another state of the franchise in the books. Appreciate everyone. You guys have a phenomenal weekend. Grab your cookies on the way out. We are out of here.
Go Steph.
Okay. There we go. Steph Curry with the shot, boy. Let's go. That's Jason Aponte. I'm Brad Graham. We're going to get into it all right now.